Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's visit to France. It was a three-day visit that concludes today. We're going to be talking about the main topics of discussion between the president and his French counterpart, meeting with the different ministers and officials, and we're going to be focusing on that with our distinguished guests. But before we do that, let's check out some of the stories making the news today. And we'll start off with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on the third and final day of his state visit to France, meeting with French Prime Minister Jean Castex in Paris on Tuesday, during which they discussed means to foster bilateral ties in various domains, in addition to issues of mutual concern. President al-Sisi hailed the Egyptian-French strong friendly ties in all fields, confirming that Egypt is looking forward to boosting joint cooperation, especially at the economic and trade levels. For his part, the French Premier expressed his appreciation to Egypt and praised the joint historical relations, affirming his government's keenness to increase investments in Egypt in a bid to support the developmental efforts in the country, especially after the huge achievements held under the leadership of President al-Sisi. The presidential spokesman, Ambassador Rady, said the talks also tackled bilateral relations and means of boosting cooperation in the military and security fields, in addition to a number of regional and international issues of mutual concern. President al-Sisi also held talks with the head of the French Senate and the Secretary General of the Development and Cooperation Organization and heads of the French companies operating in Egypt. On the sidelines of the president's visit, the two sides signed a number of agreements in various domains, which were signed from the Egyptian side by a number of ministers, including Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry and Minister of International Cooperation Dr. Rady al-Mashad. And as part of the country's effort to fight terrorism all over the country, the armed forces said on Tuesday they had been able to monitor and destroy a number of terrorist hideouts. The statement said several operations had been launched from September 1st of 2020 to December 8th. According to the statement, the Air Force has successfully destroyed 437 homes and warehouses for explosive materials and ammunition in the northeast of the country, adding that 25 terrorists were killed during the operations. The statement also said that 6 4x4 vehicles used by terrorist elements had been targeted and destroyed, and a number of operations had been carried out, leading to the killing of 15 terrorist elements. 3 automatic rifles, a sniper rifle, a communication device used by terrorist elements, as well as a number of mobile phones and passports were seized. Up to 159 explosive devices were discovered on main axes and roads, 32 motorcycles used by Takfiris were destroyed, and 12 terrorists arrested. Maritime forces have continued their effort to secure and protect borders in all strategic directions and secure vital targets in Egypt's territorial waters in the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. And polling stations still have their doors open for voters to cast their ballots in the second round of the parliamentary runoff elections. Voting inside Egypt kicked off on Monday. Runoffs were limited to candidates running under the individual system who competed for the 101 undecided seats. Up to 42 individual seats were secured during the first round. 142 seats reserved for candidates running under the party list system were decided during the first round. The runoff of the second stage included constituencies of 13 governorates. And we're now joined over the phone by Ambassador Mushira Khattab, the former Minister for Family and Population. Ambassador Khattab, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Ambassador Khattab, we're focusing tonight on the three-day visit of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to France, meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron alongside many French officials. One of the main topics on the agenda to be discussed was fighting extremism. Can you shed more light on the importance of having such an important and sensitive topic discussed between Egypt and France, manifested in the discussions between the two presidents?
Yes, and actually, as I have been online while you were reading the last piece of news concerning the visit, you spoke about talks about military and security cooperation. And you mentioned the meeting with the head of the OECD, and closely linked with this, fighting extremism. We all know the problems that France has been having domestically, and I think Paris is looking up to Cairo to help with fighting extremism among some migrants or first, second, third generation migrants living in France and in Europe and all over the world. We know that migrants abroad are they don't always get the ideal education at schools, and usually some of them could be manipulated by some extremists. And we've seen a wave of accidents or incidents or problems that happened specifically in France. And I think Egypt is very well poised to help in this with Al-Azhar in disseminating and raising awareness of the correct Islam, not the ideas that are being promoted among some migrant communities, and help them to integrate in their new adopted society, so that they, like President Macron, when he was talking about this, he called them the separatists, because he said that everybody living on the French territory must believe in the principles of the Republic. So they need assistance in guiding teachers, religious leaders who are teaching or guiding the migrant communities in Europe in general. And Egypt is very well suited to do this through Al-Azhar and through its educational institutions. And I think this is a very important area of cooperation between the two countries.
Yes. Ambassador Khattab, now the President Sisi in Egypt actually worked on the change of religious discourse over the past few years. And you've mentioned a sort of cooperation that could be transferred as well between Egypt and Al-Azhar to France. Do you feel that France could use some sort of religious discourse, some new way of understanding and incorporating the kind of dialogue?
Sure, of course. I mean, cultural cooperation between France and Egypt is a very strong area of cooperation, and it has been ongoing historically for decades, for many, many years. And Egypt is very well suited. Al-Azhar is very well suited to guide, build the capacity of religious cadres who work in the mosques and teach them the proper Islam. Because people, when they are not living at home, they don't choose the teacher. So sometimes they fall in the wrong hands. And Egypt can help very well with this. Al-Azhar, with its moderate interpretation of our religion, and its people, usually Egypt sends shuyukh during the month of Ramadan, and sometimes they use some of our religious people in their mosques. So if we train these people and teach them that those who decided to leave home and go live in a different society, a society with a different culture, different religion, we're going there to make a new life, not to start a jihad. against those who are different from us, and teach them that cultural diversity is richness, and there is freedom of religion. Someone is Muslim, the other is Christian, the third is a Jew or a non-believer. Everybody is free to choose his ideology, his religion, and we have to live together in peace.
Yes. Well, Ambassador Khattab, we're talking about France now, but extremism is a global phenomena and it's an international issue. Do you see other countries from the international communities or other European countries following suit, and maybe Egypt can be cooperating in combating extremism in other countries as well, with other countries as well, other than France?
Of course. This is a global problem now. You have people, on the right or on the left. It's a global issue, and it's not only in Europe. You have it also in Africa. If you look at some Nigeria, Niger, Mauritania, Chad, and the Tuareg, this is a problem. In Nigeria, some girls were kidnapped while going to school by some extremists who think that sending girls to school is against religion. So it's a global problem, but Al-Azhar has an international reputation for being the highest Islamic institute with the moderate, the proper interpretation of Islam. So actually the world is looking up to Al-Azhar, is looking up to Egypt to help diffuse this wave of extremism. You have people who are extremes against Islam, and you have some Muslims who are sending.
Yes. Ambassador Mushira Khattab, the former Minister of Family and Population, thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, now President Sisi is saying that the relationship and the cooperation between Egypt and France is one of the main pillars for stability in the Mediterranean region. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has affirmed that Egypt is keen on strengthening its strategic partnership with France, which represents an important pillar for maintaining security and stability in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. During his state visit to France, President al-Sisi held summit talks with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron. The talks addressed cooperation between the two countries and developments in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East regions. Their talks covered on Egypt's vision regarding regional crises, especially the Middle East region and the Eastern Mediterranean. The two leaders also probed increasing joint cooperation, especially in the investment and trade domains, in light of Egypt's efforts to lure foreign investments to meganational projects in the country. At a joint press conference, Macron said he would not condition the sales of weapons to Egypt on human rights because he did not want to weaken Cairo's ability to counter terrorism in the region, adding that it was more effective to have a policy of demanding dialogue than a boycott, which would only reduce the effectiveness of one of their partners in the fight against terrorism. On Libya, Macron stated that he had spoken frankly to President Sisi about matters of human rights in the country. He said that while progress has been made in stabilizing Libya, threats persisted from external actors. For his part, President Sisi said that he is working on securing the future of the Egyptian people in the region. He affirmed anew that the security of 100 million people falls upon him, accused the Brotherhood terrorist organization of exporting terrorism ideologies to France and to the rest of the world. Earlier, Sisi and French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian discussed a number of regional files with a special focus on the latest developments in the East Mediterranean, Libya and Syria, along with crises in some countries in the region. President Sisi stressed the full support of the international community as one of the settlement to all such crises in order to face any meddling attempts uprooting terrorism and achieving balance among countries in the region.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and now we're joined here in the studio by Dr.Tamer, Rady, member of the Egyptian European Council and head of the economics department at Ain Shams University. Dr. Rady, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleased to be here.
Dr. Rady, first of all, today is the third and final day of the President's visit to France, meeting the French President, Emmanuel Macron, alongside with many leading French officials in the country. They talked about many different topics, talked about agreements and cooperation, memorandums of understanding, everything. How important is such a visit to reconsolidate the Egyptian-French relations within the ongoing political developments taking place now?
Well, this is not the very first visit of President Sisi to France, not the first time to meet with President Macron. There has been plenty of meetings throughout the last few years, whether they took place in Egypt, took place in France, or some places others. If you look at it, it comes at a very interesting time in which you are troubled, the European economy, the Egyptian economy, most of the economies, by the COVID crisis. They are also troubled by the rise of terrorism everywhere, in particular Libya. So they have an mutual interest in the safety and security of North Africa, of the Middle East, of the Mediterranean. And there is a lot of economic relationships to be discussed. There is a lot of political things to be discussed. There is a lot of cultural and social issues to be discussed. And there is a lot of military cooperation to be continued. So that the visit came at a very interesting time indeed.
Yes. Well, you've mentioned the military cooperation. Egypt has been having its own military drills, and many countries were taking part in that as participating within the drills, and other countries were actually just observers. But everybody has been trying to really take notice and participate in one shape or form. France was one of those countries. Now, whenever people, we're used to having military drills happening quite often, but when so many countries are participating in certain drills, people are trying to take notice. Are they trying to send messages to other countries? Are they trying to get ready for any imminent sort of military action taking place anywhere in the world? how are we supposed to translate and understand these military drills, and how important is the participation of all these countries with Egypt?
Well, getting ready is the name of the game for every military anywhere in the world. And to start with, you anticipate what is to come. And if you were able to read the situation, probably Egypt have anticipated what is to come, especially what is to happen in Libya a long time ago. When you look at the French interest in the area, of course, stability of North Africa and the Mediterranean is incredibly important. But the situation is very sensitive in here because the problems arising within the Mediterranean are mainly concerned with the gas exploration, natural gas exploration, with the maritime borders in which there is a huge dispute growing between Turkey on one side, Egypt, Greece, and Cyprus on the other side. Now, Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey are all NATO members. So is France and the rest of Western Europe, of course. And participating in a drill with Egypt is a very big signal to everybody playing in that Mediterranean area. The maritime borders are off limits. And that France's position is becoming very apparent on the side of what is perfectly legal and what is economically right. So it sends a huge signal. It is also very much wanted in the fight against terrorism, not just as a signal to whoever is playing with the Mediterranean borders, but also to illegal immigration, to shipments and supplies to rebels or I'd say militias in Libya, that France is involved and it's present.
Yes. Well, we're going to talk about Libya in a moment, but you've mentioned the safety and security of the Mediterranean, and as you've mentioned, it involves Cyprus, Greece, and Turkey as well. Now, everybody understands the legality and being in the right sort of legal frame of the Mediterranean and the gas exploration. Now, how much France, being a member of the NATO and member of the European Council, how much influence and how strong of a message do you think they have concerning the maritime borders and really stopping any sort of intrusion on or illegal intrusion on such gas discovery and these borders?
Well, it is not only France that sounded the alarm, but the addition, what the French did is to participate in the naval exercises. So they said, well, we are doing even more than just saying, you shouldn't be exploring in lands that is not yours. Germany said that, Italy said that. So many different countries have denounced what has been happening on the part of Turkey, but to participate in naval exercises, that was the one extra step taken by the French people. But I guess every reasonable man in Europe knows that any kind of confrontation is really bad for every participant. Any confrontation is horrible. What you really want to assert is every political solution that can be achieved on the table should be achieved. And to that extent, a little bit of show of force or solidarity, is a signal. Don't come here. Don't do that and stop it now. But meanwhile, you have to use all the political pressure from within NATO, from within the European Union, and from within even other countries involved. And hence, I think that number one priority would always be a very peaceful solution to this. But the second one is there is a show of solidarity, and it is a very powerful show of solidarity here.
Yes. Well, the other side of the equation is Turkey. How do you see Turkey really responding, and how are they reacting to all these drills and the political messages and the solidarity? How are you expecting it?
They are also pretty reasonable, but the thing is the economic incentive there is pretty strong. So you're sitting on the Mediterranean looking apart and saying, oh, that's a lot of gas. I want a piece of that. And the thing is, that's not your waters. And if the world, kept an eye on the other way, they will go there. So the idea is you have to be very alert. Stick to what is legally yours. And they are not in a very good position in that area.
And do you think that they will see to these sort of messages and pressure?
I'm confident at the end of the day they'd have to, because that's an international rule of law. Once you get some countries on your side that understand what is legal and the boundaries are set, then everybody's going to play by the rules, hopefully.
Dr. Rady, if we're talking now about Libya, this is an issue, a file that has been really under the microscope since 2011. That's almost 9-10 years now. Do you feel that the way France is and the Egyptian-French relations, do you think that France will be able to have a big influence in the Libyan issue now, or is it the same it has been for the past 10 years?
The Libyan issue is a pretty sensitive issue. When you look at it, what is happening over there is pretty much what happened overnight in Syria. When you look at the Syrian war, and what is called the Syrian Revolution to start with, what led to a civil war, out of the blues, you had armed trucks, 200, 500, 700, 1,000 4x4, land cruisers and stuff like that, and you had suddenly 30, 40, 50,000 armed people coming in to fight. Where did they all come from? Who organized all of this? How do you get an army overnight? Now, with the war shifting a little bit and the tide is going more towards the government forces in Syria, what you have over there, the militias, the fanatic fighters, did have to run someplace. And what was anticipated here a long time ago is they're going to go to Libya. They would go wherever there is no rule of law. And they can be used as a pressure on Egypt. They can intimidate him all the time, and they can cause serious damage to Libya itself. When you look at Libya now, more than 2 central banks, 2 governments. You don't know who's ruling Libya. But Libya is divided. That is very true. And for Egypt, that is a national security issue. Your western borders are intimidating, and you don't know who's gathering over there. You have to keep an eye, very close eye. For France, it is also intimidating. The security of the Middle East, the security of North Africa, is the security of all of Europe. It is a route for immigrants. It's a route for so many troubles. And if you harbor terrorism in there, it would be exported to Europe. So any person who wants active participant and is trying to enforce peaceful solutions would have to fight terrorism in Libya. We'll have to find who's the beneficiary, who's supplying the militias in Libya, who's growing this, who's making an escape route to Syrian fighters or the fighters in Syria, and everybody that's called a real fanatic to find a new location, a new home in Libya. The whole world has an interest in this. The whole free world has an interest to fight. France, of course, has been and will be always an important player. An incredibly important player given the historical ties to the neighborhood in here. So I believe they would have a very strong say in the European Union and a very strong say on the ground as well in that fight.
Well, Doctor, over the past decade, Egypt has been calling on fighting terrorism and fighting extremism and illegal migration. And it's a global, international phenomenon. Now, what is the best way to deal with it? Is it cooperating with, for instance, the European Union as an organization, as an institution, or cooperating individually with countries, like dealing individually with France, dealing individually with Germany, dealing individually with Italy and Spain? Which is stronger? I mean, the strength of France, is it strong in terms of cooperation on its own or within the European Union, for instance?
Well, the answer is always going to be all of the above. France is an influential member of the European Union. France on itself also has a lot of Islamic communities living in there. And the traditional French values do not distinguish between French citizens. If you look at the history of France, France wouldn't keep statistics of its citizens' religions. It's against human rights and equality. France understands very well the hardship of terrorism and discrimination. When you look at the fight would involve everybody and all fronts. You cannot fight ideas with weapons. Yeah, that's the number one rule. So the number one is you have to explain to the Western world that thin line that separates between religious groups and fanaticism, and the ideas that really lie behind, that we have suffered from and has been exported to places like France and Western Europe and America. And as Dr. Mushira said on the phone, even to Africa. So you can't fight ideas with weapons alone. Now, weapons are a must, of course, in that fight. But a long-term solution would involve a global community forming to fight ideas from within and to fight the roots and the message that they recruit their own people and turn their minds into such a behavior. You would also have to fight things like poverty. Because when you look at it, you know, where do they come from? From really poor areas, from really poor neighborhoods, and from really poor countries. So you fight in all the fronts in a global team. And you deal individually with each country according to its situation. And you deal globally with all of the countries combined, because it is a human threat to all human race.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Rady mentioned, there are many different aspects of the cooperation between Egypt and France, the military one, the humanitarian one, and also the economic one. Let's check out this report regarding the shared view and stances between Egypt and France over many issues, and we'll be right back.
Relations between Egypt and France have spanned centuries, for the Middle Ages to the present day. As of 2020, relations are considered distinguished and strong as the two countries spearhead efforts to settle regional and international crises and cooperate in the war against terror. They have close military, economic and cultural ties, and activities such as the France-Egypt Cultural Year, tourism, diplomatic missions, trade and a close political relationship. Institutions like the Institut d'Egypte and the French Institute in Egypt and the French University of Egypt also aid in promoting cultural exchange between Egypt and France. Egypt's Cultural Year, celebrating the 150th anniversary of the opening of the Suez Canal and coinciding with French President Emmanuel Macron's official visit to Egypt. The activities of the year were coordinated by the Institute France in Cairo and the Egyptian Cultural Center in Egypt. Also, the Egyptian and naval forces have carried out a joint naval training exercise in the northern Mediterranean amid growing tensions between the two countries and Turkey over Ankara's gas exploration ambitions in the region. 2 frigates were involved in the joint exercise, which is part of the Egyptian Armed Forces plan to upgrade training and strengthen cooperation with the armed forces of brotherly and friendly states.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our conversation with Dr. Rady. Dr. Rady, now another aspect of the visit is the economic cooperation between Egypt and France. Now, we've seen many forms of economic cooperation, be it through military cooperation and getting different sort of airplanes, the Rafale, Also, there's been cooperation in terms of health sector, antiquities, of course, and also transportation, working on the infrastructure. What do you feel are the main highlights of the economic cooperation that Egypt and France are enjoying right now?
When you look at the numbers, France has over probably 160, 170 subsidiaries working in Egypt for a long time now, employing more than 30,000 people with all the trigger effect of such activities, economic activities, well-rooted, very reputable companies in Egypt. There is a growing part of trade. The volume of trade has been consistently increasing. Of course, you want to drop off a little bit the time of economic confusion because of the COVID-19. But when you look at it, the trade volume ranges between 2 to 2.5 billion a year. The cooperation portfolio right now involves more than $7.5 billion. A very large part of that goes into transportation. And the French have been always very active participants in big projects in Egypt, things like the subway stations, which mimic that very much of France, of Paris, into train lines. And there is a lot of train cars that have been imported and from France. There is a whole lot going on in the health sector, a whole lot going on in the educational sector. And in fact, when you look at education, it's a very unique position for France, that France had always dominated the educational life in Egypt relative to any other foreign nation. They don't offer expensive schools for teaching, but when you look at the French schools, they've always been everywhere for the last 70, 80 years, in rural areas, in rich areas, in poorer neighborhoods. And you have a very strong, Francophone elite in Egypt. They've always been involved in universities. They're probably the only foreign government that cooperates with Egyptian government universities, in which you'll find French sections within the University of Cairo, within the University of Alexandria, within Ain Shams. So they have been heavily involved in education. They have also been very, very active participants on the administrative advice level, that they've been helping Egypt within the hierarchy of the Egyptian government to improve the administrative performance of Egyptian officials. Because we mimic that of France when it comes to the hierarchy of how government works. In France, everything comes back to Paris, and in Egypt, everything on the decision level comes back to Cairo. So there also on the judicial system, we mimic the French law. So a whole lot of help of education comes on from France. So France is so heavily involved in different aspects of economic activities in Egypt, educational activities, and culturally. They have been involved into movie making, in joint concerts and stuff like that. So they are definitely very heavily involved. 7.5 billion is a very good chance to strengthen that bilateral relations.
Yes. Well, Dr. Rady, as you've mentioned, they worked a lot on the transportation and the infrastructure as well. But it's not just France. Do you feel that, as you've mentioned, the confusing situation that the whole world is going through as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, do you feel that because Egypt is one of the very few countries that actually showed economic growth during that period, and many countries are currently actually under lockdown and their economy is stagnated somehow, do you feel that Egypt then represents some sort of a fertile soil to, if they can't improve their economy in their own country, on their own land, so Egypt constitutes an opportunity to boost their economy somehow on foreign soil?
It offers definitely a safe haven for those who would like to venture into new opportunities. When you look at it, we have maintained a 3.5% GDP growth rate, only positive growth rate almost in the neighborhood, if not in the in the region as well, with the Mediterranean and North Africa and all of that. We have been very fortunate to have all credit ranking agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor, Fitch, they are keeping us at B2, B+, B, and the three of them has Egypt as a stable outlook for the future. So any foreign investor really interested has his chance. Sometimes I say that in that context, usually investment decisions lag a little bit because people are counting their losses, and when they are counting the losses, you look at the alternative, but you don't take the decision that fast. But within the next few months, there is a huge potential in lowering more foreign direct investment to Egypt. 2009, the number ranged around 9 billion of direct inflows to Egypt, which is a really great sign. The second thing is, it seems to me that with the discovery of the vaccine, with the logistics of distributing such vaccines within the next year, and with the experience of how to cope with COVID's wave number 2, given that the damage of the lockdown of the phase number 1 is now being measured and calculated, and that delicate balance between the loss of life and the loss of GDP growth is taken into consideration in the economic activities in most European countries. My belief is European countries have gained a little bit of knowledge in how to cope with that with the second and third waves. Hence, it shouldn't be impacting them as much as it did in the first time. All of those, when you put them all together, you have a very good perspective for mutual cooperation in the future and lowering more foreign direct investment in the months to come.
And in our turn then, what sort of efforts or what sort of things that you feel we should be doing to actually be able to receive all these foreign investment opportunities?
We should be doing what exactly President Sisi have been doing. You're visiting, you're signing your bilateral cooperation, and you're sending the messages and capitalizing on the major projects that have been going over here, on the new capital that you are building, on the good ratings that you are having from the international community banking system and ranking agencies. You capitalize on all of this, but on the local front as well, you still have to simplify all those investment procedures required for foreign direct. That's an ongoing battle that's never ending.
And that's the investment law?
There is always room to improve, always.
And does that also include working on the investment law here in Egypt?
It would always include working on that. It has been improved several times. There is always rooms for more and more and more. Your investment there is no black and white in here. There is always room for advancement.
Yes. Well, Dr. Rady, we've spoken earlier about the naval and military drills that Egypt is having with the participation of many other countries, including France. Now, you've mentioned that the whole world is really suffering the economic impact as a result of COVID-19. Do you feel that participating in naval drills or taking part in any sort of military action would actually work against the economic recovery for these different countries, or would actually work for them? Because a lot of people are saying, well, the military conflicts is actually the biggest business any country could be involved in.
Now you have to prepare, because the cost of preparing is better than losing all the economic interest that you're trying to protect. So when you look at from a strategic look, of course, you have to be always prepared for the kind of tension, confrontation that builds in, and you always have to send signals that this is my stuff, don't come near it. And the cost of doing that is usually well suited. And unfortunately, the whole world is into this corner. The idealism of thinking that, oh, let's not spend on the military and let's all live in a peaceful life. That doesn't happen in real life, So being practical, of course, you calculate the social benefit and the social cost of such readiness. But when you look at what's happening on the ground in Egypt, and you look to places like Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Iraq, Libya, and you say, well, thank God for having a strong arm.
Dr. Rady, France is supporting Egypt within its process and progress towards achieving a sustainable development. Now, is France one of the main countries that are on the road or actually do have some sort of sustainable development and using sustainable energy and renewable energy and going for a green economy? Is that a country that we can look up to and cooperate and make use of their know-how and expertise?
Well, indeed, President Macron has been one that came in with an agenda into turning green really fast. In fact, his fuel taxes was one that was not very well received in France when he tried to apply it a couple of years ago, and riots were everywhere in France because of that. So, is the French government ideologically oriented? Yes. Are they trying to speed up a little bit beyond their economic ability or beyond the people understanding? Pretty much yes. Do they have the know-how? Of course they do. Are they the ones to look after? Well, they are one of the countries that you are going to look after, but there are so many other countries with good experiences, of course. You've got Germany, you've got countries in Scandinavia, countries like Denmark, like Finland. When it comes to green economy, they're probably more active and they have more of the resources and the people that are actually very understanding. Because people have to understand and support any policy taken for this policy to succeed. So yes, you can learn a lot from the French, you can learn a lot from so many different others, but there's always going to be the pain of how much are we going to spend, how much are we going to lose, how much are we going to gain? And it takes time. And I think that in that aspect, one very good thing is when dealing with young people in Egypt, you'll find that the concept of sustainable development and the concept of a greener environment is starting to flourish among younger people, which gives you hope in the future that you're going to find public support for such initiatives.
And is that manifested in SMEs and startups and entrepreneurship?
Always does, always does. And you'll find that within the visit of President Sisi, that was discussed as well. And the French government also understands the importance of this for the Egyptian economy. So thankfully, they have participated in it. And they have been always heavily involved with youth and education, and they kind of know what the young people in here want.
Dr. Rady, now we're done with the French visit by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and you're saying France is not the only country to look up to when we're really examining and studying this sort of cooperation. What other country do you feel should be the first on the list after France?
When you're trying to apply for a green economy,
for a green economy and sustainable development, yes.
Well, as I said, your attempt to apply has to first start from where everybody else ended. So there is a French experiment to learn. When you try to apply this in the fuel, it didn't go that easy on the public.
Yes.
When you try to speed it up so fast, economic conditions, the hits of the COVID-19 and other slowing down in Europe in particular, have made the people against it. So when you look at the French, you are not just looking for the know-how, you're looking for, well, what works and doesn't work?
Yes.
When would it work? When would it not work? If you're looking for the know-how, well, the French are active participants, so is Denmark, so is Sweden, so is Finland, for example, and they would provide you with a very good know-how as well.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Rady has mentioned, still there's a lot to be done regarding achieving this sort of economic progress, sustainable development, renewable and green energy and economy. But definitely the President's visit to France is one that pushes the Egyptian economy on the right path, in the right direction as well. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr.Tamer Rady, the member of the Egyptian European Council and also head of the Economic Department at Ain Shams University. Dr. Rady, always a pleasure having you with us on the show.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Night International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.